On the shores of the Byzantine Empire, the heat and sea breeze created a sense of calm, while the sound of waves crashing against the rocks brought temporary tranquility. The scent of incense and spices filled the air, reflecting the empire's wealth. A merchant ship docked at dawn. Its sails, worn by the wind, carried the symbol of a serpent coiled around an anchor. Among the crew, a man in a dark blue tunic disembarked. His firm steps contrasted with the hesitation of the others. Jazz, a Byzantine emissary, brought a map of new trade routes between the empire and the Arabs. These routes could strengthen our empire, but the interests of our allies and enemies were about to place us at the center of a diplomatic war. Tensions between the empire's factions and neighboring powers were poised to erupt, and maps of new lands were about to decide the region's future. As Jazz spoke in a cold stone room, illuminated only by flickering torches, a woman named Naomi observed the emissary's gestures. She was a hired historian tasked with deciphering ancient inscriptions found along the routes on the map. Her fingers traced the contours of a scroll hidden beneath her garments, where unknown symbols seemed to pulse under the light. Later, walking through the alleys of Constantinople, Naomi encountered a vendor of fake maps, who whispered, "Beware the eyes that never sleep." She didn't understand, but she kept the words as a warning. Days later, a sealed letter with red wax arrived in Jazz's hands. Inside was a drawing of a sculpture in Riga, its carved eyes pointing north. The message was clear: the routes were not just about trade, but about something buried beneath ancient cities. Naomi, meanwhile, discovered that the symbols on her scroll corresponded to markings on the stone figures of Riga. She set off north, leaving behind the empire's heat. On the road, she met a man named Old Luis, a guide who knew the secrets of the Baltic forests. He spoke of statues that shifted position during the night and travelers who vanished near them. In Riga, the narrow streets seemed to whisper. Naomi and Luis walked to the stone mask square, where 12 sculptures surrounded a dry fountain. Each figure's eyes were empty sockets, but as Naomi approached, shadows danced within them. Luis recoiled, muttering about legends of sleeping guardians. That night, while examining the maps by candlelight, Naomi noticed that the routes traced by Jazz formed an identical pattern to the statues' positions. A metallic sound made her turn. One of the stone figures was now facing her, its fingers pointing to the ground. In Constantinople, Jazz received news that an Arab general offered a secret alliance in exchange for control over one of the routes. He refused, but knew others would accept. Meanwhile, Naomi discovered a chamber beneath the fountain, where a mosaic depicted the statues as portals to an underworld realm. Luis vanished the following morning, leaving only his leather hat beside one of the sculptures. Naomi continued alone, following the markings on the map to a frozen lake. Beneath the ice, she saw dark shapes moving like shadows with a will of their own. When Jazz arrived in Riga, pressured by the Byzantine court, he found Naomi by the lake. She showed him the mosaic and explained that the trade routes were veins of an ancient body, connecting places that should not be disturbed. "These maps are more than paths to spices," she said. "They are invitations to something that has been watching us for centuries." That night, as they discussed what to do, the statues in the square began to bleed a black substance that flowed like ink. Residents locked their doors, and church bells rang without reason. Naomi and Jazz decided to follow the last route on the map, leading them to a ruined tower in the Vidme forests. There, they found an altar covered in runes identical to those on the scroll. As Naomi touched the stone, she saw visions of burning cities and broken agreements, while Jazz heard voices whispering in dead languages. A roar echoed, and part of the ceiling collapsed, revealing the full moon. Under its light, the runes glowed, forming a picture of the complete map. It was a web of connections between empires, but at the center, where Riga should have been, there was only emptiness. Back in the city, a messenger delivered Jazz an arrest warrant for Naomi, accused of heresy. He burned the document and helped her escape, knowing they were both being used in a larger game. At the docks, a boat awaited them, paid for by someone who signed only as the Guardian. As they sailed down the Aljava, Naomi looked back and saw the Riga statues move in unison, their arms outstretched as if trying to reach the sea. Jazz held the map to his chest, wondering if the truth they sought would save them or destroy them. The answer, like the statue's eyes, remained hidden. The boat glided down the Aljava River under a gray sky. The water reflected the shadows of the overhanging trees. Naomi wrapped the map in oiled cloth, her fingers still trembling from the vision in the tower. Jazz watched the shore, where dark shapes seemed to follow their route. "They are not birds," he murmured. "They are crows, but they fly in circles as if something attracts them." Naomi did not reply. Her mind was caught by the runes that glowed under the moon. Later, when they docked in an abandoned village, a man in a brown cloak approached them. Gasper introduced himself, his voice rough as tree bark. "I know where you are going. The stone eyes do not forgive those who challenge them." He offered shelter in exchange for hearing their stories, and they accepted, wary. In a wooden hut, Gasper lit a fire and spoke of a submerged temple in the nearby lake, where statues identical to those in Riga guarded an artifact called the Heart of Memory. "They say that whoever touches it will see the truth behind all lies," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the fire. "But truth kills as much as ignorance." Naomi felt a shiver. Jazz, pragmatic, inquired about Arab interests in the routes. Gasper laughed. "They do not seek spices. They seek the same as you, control over what they cannot understand." The next morning, Gasper vanished, leaving only a handful of poppy seeds on the table. Naomi and Jazz followed to the lake, guided by a worn stone path. Beneath the frozen surface, sculpted human forms in ice floated like specters. Naomi placed the map on the ice and noticed that the lines of the routes converged on a specific point. Using a pickaxe, she broke the ice layer, revealing a rusted metal hatch. Inside, a leather-bound journal described experiments with sight beyond the flesh, signed by a 13th-century alchemist. As they read, a group of knights in red cloaks emerged on the shore. "The Inquisition," Jazz whispered, recognizing the embroidered symbols. They ran into the forest, but the knights surrounded them. "Surrender the map and the woman," one of them commanded, his face hidden by an iron mask. Naomi, without thinking, opened the journal to a marked page and recited a passage in Latin. The air crackled, and the surrounding trees began to bleed a dark resin. The horses reared, frightened, and the knights retreated. Jazz pulled Naomi into the woods, where sunlight barely penetrated. Hours later, they found a clearing with an intact statue, its onyx eyes gleaming like embers. Naomi approached and touched the cold stone. Instantly, she found herself in a circular room, surrounded by younger versions of herself. Each held a fragment of the map, but when she tried to touch them, they vanished. Jazz, outside, cried her name. She returned to reality gasping, as the statue began to crack. From within the fissure, a bluish light escaped, enveloping them in a frigid mist. As dusk fell, they reached a fishing village, where an old man offered them shelter in exchange for repairing nets. While working, the man told them of an ancient ritual. At the equinox, the statues open their eyes, and the world of the living mixes with the world of the dead. Naomi realized that the equinox was 3 days away. That night, she dreamt of the alchemist in the journal, who showed her a star map where constellations formed the same trade routes. She awoke startled, the journal open in her lap, displaying a new page written in her own handwriting. "The heart is not in the lake. It is in you." Jazz, suspicious, confronted her about the journal. "I don't know how this happened," she admitted, showing the newly written pages. He sighed, torn between reason and fear. The next morning, they headed north, where the map indicated a mountain with a single statue. On the way, they found a destroyed camp, bodies wearing cloaks similar to Gasper's. Among the debris, Naomi found a medallion with the serpent and anchor symbol from Jazz's ship. "They are connected," she said, her voice weak. Jazz kept the object, knowing the betrayal came from within the Empire itself. Upon reaching the mountain, a snowstorm forced them to seek shelter in a cave. At its depths, they found a chamber with walls covered in mirrors. Each reflection showed a different version of themselves. Naomi as an empress, Jazz as a beggar, both as children. In the center, a stone basin held silvery liquid. "It's mercury," Jazz stated. Naomi dipped her hands in, and the images in the mirrors shifted, revealing scenes of war and broken pacts. A scream echoed, and the mirrors shattered, releasing a mist that formed the silhouette of a woman. "You are not ready," she whispered before dissipating. Naomi and Jazz emerged from the cave with heavy hearts, their eyes filled with unanswered questions. The mist that had released the woman's silhouette still hung in the air, a reminder that what they sought was far greater than any map or trade route. As they walked through the snow, Naomi felt a strange force pulling her towards the mountain. "She is calling us," she whispered, but Jazz only tightened the map to his chest, knowing the truth was closer than they ever imagined. The next day, upon reaching the mountain peak, they found a final statue, more imposing than all the others. Its eyes glowed with a bluish light, and as they approached, the ground began to tremble. Suddenly, the wind howled fiercely, raising dust and dry leaves, as the statue slowly moved, its head turning towards them. Naomi, without hesitation, opened the journal and read aloud a passage that seemed to have been written specifically for that moment. Time seemed to stop, and for a fleeting instant, all the secrets of the world seemed to lie before them. When the storm finally subsided, the sun illuminated a new landscape. The mountain had vanished, replaced by an empty field, where only Naomi and Jazz's footprints remained. The map in their hands was now blank, as if it had never existed. They looked at each other, knowing that something had changed forever. What they had found was not a treasure, nor a power, but a truth that could not be shared. With a final glance back, they moved forward, leaving behind the past and walking towards a future no one could predict.